Hello RPG fans and welcome back to the kingdom. Lately I've been wanting to take a trip down memory lane and in particular darkcloud 2. Now with the challenge run that I decided to do, this game was probably the most difficult game to try and find challenge run potential because the way the game's designed is you have certain resistances on the enemies and your weapons can do 0 damage. And this made it extremely difficult to try and find which weapon I potentially wanted to use, whether it's the right-hand weapon, which is melee, or the left-handed weapon, which is ranged. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Vanguard real quick, because this enemy was kind of my biggest roadblock within the early stages of Chapter 1. So left to right, we've got Max's right-handed weapon, which is the wrench, followed by the sword, which is Monica's right-handed weapon. And then we've got 3 weapons for Max on his left hand. It goes normal damage, and then beam damage, and then grenade damage. The second last icon is Magic, which is Monica's left-handed weapon. And then we have the Ride Pod, which is Max's R3, I believe. I'll share some additional information on this a little bit later in the video, but for now, can you beat darkcloud 2 using Max's left-handed weapon? It took me a good 4 to 6 hours to decide what kind of rules I wanted in place, as I wasn't exactly sure what was and wasn't possible with this game being so old and just the way it's designed. Nevertheless, these are the limitations that I decided on. Must use Max's left-hand weapon only, no inventing, no armor or life upgrades, no healing items, no ride pod, no transforming, main max when I can, which means I have to use the 1500 Gilda seal breaks, and no glitches, exploits, or hacks. The first mini-boss fight of the game is against Linda, which is more of a tutorial fight, and it teaches us how to use the ride pod, which we are forced to do in order to defeat Linda, as the ride pod is the only damage that can actually deplete Linda's life bar. So we go ahead and do that. The next couple of stages, number 5 and number 6, is where I wasn't quite sure if this game was even doable from a challenge run perspective, particularly because of the vanguards that I had mentioned earlier. If we take a look at their defenses, I only deal 10% of my damage with the normal gun that Max has right now, which means I am hitting for 1 damage. And they have 200 HP. That means that it's going to take 200 shots of the gun to kill them. Now, that in itself isn't hard. What makes it a little bit challenging is in order to do that, I have to use the gun repair powders. And in order to get the gun repair powders, I need to get lucky by destroying crates that I pick up and throw, or they can come from a chest. But most of the time I have to sell my existing weapon upgrade crystals for Gilda and then buy the gun repair powders from the item merchant. And that is rough. So naturally this means that I'm going to have a weaker weapon than I would normally have at this point in the game. And it was also the Vanguard mob that made me go back to the drawing board and do several hours worth of research to figure out what I can do from a weapon standpoint. And that is when I found out that I would be able to upgrade my weapon and get a grenade type damage weapon. And I achieved this by using Max's default weapon, the classic gun, using enough upgrades to make the trumpet gun, and then from there upgrading it again to the grenade gun. Now with this entire process, it did take maybe an hour or so to get enough SP to be able to do all these upgrades, which wasn't really too bad. I thought that it would have taken a lot longer to upgrade this weapon, but now we finally have the grenade gun and everything is just getting outright demolished, including the upcoming boss that takes 100% grenade damage, and this boss just dies, which concludes Chapter 1. Not really too much to mention in Chapter 2 other than I am continuing to not use the permanent upgrades to Max's armor and life. So when I do get hit, it is about 2-shotting me at this point in the game. So I have had several game overs, but of course after every single level there is a save option, and then we do have to go back to town if we want to heal up as well. And for those who have played this game or haven't played this game, when you kill an enemy with a weapon and you change characters, for example, if I were to kill a mob with my left-handed weapon on max and then change over to Monica, all of that weapon experience that drops will go towards Monica's left and right hand. This is a pretty good power leveling strategy, especially if you're doing a normal playthrough and you can use the ride pod to just completely decimate enemies. You'll kill the enemy and then switch to whatever character you want, and it will level up both the main and offhand weapon. I do this quite a bit for leveling up Monica because at this point in the game I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to be forced to use Monica, and if I do, then I don't want her to be completely out leveled to where I don't do any damage whatsoever. Additionally, putting all this weapon experience on Monica didn't really pay out because I did forget that there is a item that I do have the ability to buy from the item shop for 1500 gilda that breaks a seal on a level. Now, a seal can be one of, I think, 4 or 5 different kinds. There's max that can be sealed from the level. In other words, it forces you to use Monica. The ride pod is sealed. There's magic that's sealed. So there is a multitude of options that do require you to break the seals if you want to continue to use max only, which I do. Since all of my weapon experience is being funneled into max, I want to use him as much as possible. The Chapter 2 boss took me a few attempts because I was misunderstanding what I needed to do in order to beat it. So when the rainbow butterfly spreads out into the 7 or 8 different colors, you need to use a ranged attack and kill the red one and then move immediately. Every time you used a ranged attack, the butterfly will launch a projectile back at you, and that needs to be dodged. And once you go counterclockwise and clean up all the butterflies, then the fight is concluded. And this pushes us on to Chapter 3, where things are starting to get extremely dicey. I am starting to get one shot on max, and so in order to resurrect max, I have to exit the level or ride the struggle bus and try and clear the level with Monica, which I did a couple times, but it just takes so long. One of the big keys is to use the bridges. There's a rock next to most of the bridges to where an enemy will get stuck on while you are on the bridge, so you do have a free opportunity to use range attacks on the mobs most of the time, with the exception of the ranged mobs. Of course, they'll fire projectiles right back at you, which need to be dodged. I decided not to upgrade Max's weapon at all in Chapter 3 because I wasn't sure if I was going to need to change that weapon to something else due to mobs being immune to grenade damage, and I didn't really want to waste all those materials if that was the case. And my damage output seems to be just fine for the most part, so I didn't see a reason to try and do any more damage right now. Approaching the end of Chapter 3, I've put about 28 to 30 hours into darkcloud 2 so far, which is pretty terrible considering how far I haven't gotten, and a lot of this was just doing research on what I can do and what I can't do and trying to figure out how to upgrade the weapons early game, especially in Chapter 1. But unfortunately, it's also at this point to where I am drastically starting to lose interest in trying to complete this challenge run. Not that I think that it's hard, but it's just kind of boring, to be honest, at least for me, and I feel like I took a lot of the fun out of it with all of the limitations. And with darkcloud 2 being darkcloud 2, there wasn't really a whole lot of challenge run potential with this game. It's kind of clear cut as to what you can do. There wasn't really a whole lot of customization in trying to choose what type of challenge run I wanted to do. Now, I could try and do melee, but and then of course there's always going to be mobs that are immune to melee. And when you keep adding on all these exceptions to the limitations that you're doing, it kind of defeats the purpose of trying to do a actual challenge run, in my opinion, if you're just going to keep adding on exception after exception. On top of that, there's some bosses later in the game as well that are immune to ranged damage in general. So this really kind of made me wonder if I should even continue to the challenge run. Like, let's take a look at these bosses right here. These are just a few examples of bosses that don't take range damage, and these are chapter bosses, which are supposed to be like the damage check bosses, or the bosses that are going to continuously give you game overs. And to have this many chapter bosses to where I'm forced to use something else besides ranged really just kind of doesn't sit well with me, and I thought that I did some adequate research on all of the mobs before I decided to do this challenge run, but for some reason these chapter bosses eluded me. And so unfortunately, this is where my darkcloud 2 challenge run does die. It's not that I failed, I just lost a whole lot of interest and motivation, and the fun factor just isn't there for me, as I just mentioned, with all the limitations. And I do apologize for everyone who was wanting to see a darkcloud 2 challenge run. I'm sure that this challenge run is probably possible, but I won't find that out. Maybe one of you guys can do it instead. But I do appreciate you watching this regardless. Thank you very much for the continued support, and please like, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you all in the next video. Bye bye.